Okay, welcome to PresentERs for this month. Today we have a wonderful treat from the far north of Japan, André. And André is Associate Professor at Hokkaido University of Education in Hakodate. And his research interests are not just extensive reading. He's also looking at learner autonomy, language learning beyond the classroom, extensive reading and listening, and recently had a focus on goal achievement with that, which is what he's going to be talking about this evening. He's also been part of our ERSIG. He has been membership and program co-chairs, and he's currently program co-chair for the Material Writers SIG. So he's very heavily involved with JALT, and tonight he's going to share his knowledge about extensive reading. So over to you, André.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that introduction. So again, my name is Andre, and I've been in Hakodate since about 2001. And so today, of course, I should mention that this presentation was actually my presentation that I did at JELT 2024. So again, it's really, I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this with even more people, especially those that were not able to be able to attend the GEL 2024 conference. So again, what can successful readers teach us about achieving goals in ER? So just kind of go over the overview here. So I will be looking at my course and like how I teach extensive reading and listening, and then I'll be getting into the study, followed by the results and discussion, and of course, the limitations of the current study and future directions. And of course, if you do have questions, please feel free to ask them at the end of the presentation. So some information about the extensive reading listening course. I should mention that at the time of this study, it was part of the language curriculum for English teachers. As of this year, it has become an elective, but at the time it was a required course. And of course, it was offered in the spring and fall semesters, which again, it is still offered now. But again, just to reiterate, the difference is that now it is an elective, but when at the time of the study, it was a required course. And so you had the same students from the spring and the fall. So it was a 1-year extensive reading and listening course. And there were about 20 students. And the students, of course, had various reading levels. And so so I was teaching one of the extensive reading and listening courses. I was teaching A, and my colleague at the time was teaching B. And we would have students do the extensive reading foundation placement test in advance as part of our way to place things. So I was more the advanced readers, and my colleague had more of the beginner readers. So my extensive reading and listening course is very much in what Waring and McLean talk about, the purest dimension, where the focus is mainly on the reading and listening. So very few follow-up activities. Of course, because it is a class and I do have to give grades. There is, of course, how can I say, sorry, there will be points given for the amount of reading that they do and the listening that they do. But again, overall, the focus is on the reading and listening. So in the spring semester, the first couple of weeks will be orientation. And so I will get students to fill out some Google Forms, asking them some questions about their L1 and L2 reading histories. And then, of course, we'll look at what is extensive reading and listening, which is always interesting because time and time again, when I ask like students, what do you imagine, when you hear extensive reading and listening, many students tend to, think of like advanced reading and listening, technical English, difficult English. That word, especially difficult, appears time and time again. So it is interesting to see like, there's still much in the way of, informing people what extensive reading and listening is. And then, of course, after we talk about extensive reading and listening, then the following week, we'll do an X reading training. So we do use X reading for this class. And then the remaining classes will be the weekly reading and listening assignments to, of course, to encourage that regular reading and listening, um, which again, it is important. And in this presentation, of course, I'm not going to be getting into the pros and cons of like word counts and book counts and whatnot. But in my class, I do have weekly goals for the students to achieve. And then, of course, once we get through the orientation, the reading and the reading while listening assignments begin, and that will continue into the fall semester. So basically, students will have about a year of extensive reading and listening. So, so the weekly reading goals, so we have, actually there are two. There's the 7,000 words, which is for the reading assignment. And of course, the available books, I usually say like your reading level, plus or minus one. And then there's the weekly listening while reading assignment, which is 5,000 words. Excuse me, sorry. The reason why I went with a weekly listening while reading assignment instead of just a plain listening is that with X reading, it was kind of difficult for students to like follow along the story when it was just the audio only. So I actually had students to, again, I encourage them to just listen and follow on with the story, but to help them navigate the books on X reading, I have this listening while reading assignment, and that's 5,000 words. And of course, for that assignment, I asked students to choose books like at least, one or two levels below their actual reading level. For the weekly listening while reading assignment, students were asked to listen to the book in its entirety. And for both assignments, there was a minimum and maximum reading speed. So of course, no slower than 60 words per minute, no faster than 200 words per minute. And then, of course, the number of words each week were counted if those requirements were met. And of course, if they got 60% on the X reading quiz. And of course, for those who are familiar with X reading, 60% is not a very high threshold. As long as you understand the story and you're comfortable with the story, you're probably going to get that percent. And so yeah, so again, points were given for the amount with again going from like 7,000 words to 6, 5, 4, 3 like that. And the assignments were opened at 8:30, like about half an hour before the class began, and they closed on Mondays 1 p.m. So students were able to access the assignments before class, and that of course, I hope would give them some time to choose books or to kind of get ready for the assignments for that week. So again, for the weekly class, class flow, basically, I would start off every week asking students like, what did you do to achieve your goals from the previous week? And then we would have book recommendations. So again, some of the students were sharing levels. So I hoped that the students would be able to share the books that they're reading and kind of pick up some potential titles that they might want to be reading later on. And of course, once those two activities were finished, students were allowed to decide whatever assignment they would, wanted to do, whether it's the reading only or the listening while reading. And then while they were doing those assignments, I would ask students to come up one by one, and we would have teacher-student consultation. So again, going back to my interest in learner autonomy, these consultations were to ask students about, how was their reading going? Were they having any problems? And of course, if they said anything like that kind of stood about how they achieved their goals, I would ask them for follow-up questions. Or if they weren't achieving their goals, I would kind of, talk to them like, what's going on? Is there anything like you could try differently next week to make sure that you achieve your goals? So very much trying to support that goal achievement every week, in the classroom. So, of course, getting into the study itself, of course, as we all know, our students are very busy between the club activities and part-time jobs and, of course, other classes. There is, a lot of things that kind of take away their available time, but yet some students, of course, are able to, constantly achieve their goals. And of course, from my research, and I hope this can help other teachers and as well as other students, is how are these more successful students achieving their goals. And is there anything we can learn from what they're doing that we can then, of course, teach our own students and provide advice to our own students to help them with their own goals, with their own goal achievements. So for this study, again, like I said, this was back in 2023 fall. There were 6 participants. Oh, hello? Sandra?
Yep,
I just got a Zoom quit unexpectedly. Generate a crash report to help Zoom resolve this problem. Is everyone okay here?
I'm fine. Uh, everything looks
Me
okay
as
from
well.
this. Everything looks
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, I'm going to click don't
I'm
send.
fine here too.
Okay. All right. And everyone can still see me. That's the important thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
keep
Thank you, Chris.
going, and if you suddenly stop, we'll just pause and then come back once you're rejoined.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so for this study, like I said, this was back in 2023 of the fall semester, and there were 6 students that every week they achieved their goals. And so these were the 6 students that I asked to participate in my study. And so we can see here the first 3 students. Again, we do have a variety of levels. Excuse me, sorry. I just had dinner, so I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so again, we had some students starting with level 7, some studying at level 9. Some students did progress. And of course, after the first semester, I would talk to them and ask them again, would you like to move up a level? And of course, the important thing was to make sure that they were reading and reading while listening at their appropriate level. So if they were okay with moving up, that's fine. If they wanted to actually like move down a level, that was fine too. So again, it's always, for me, it was always important to find that best level for them. And so yeah, so you have the first few students here. You can see like they're reading between like the number of words read were about 156,000 to about 180,000. A lot of listening time, and for the other 3, of course, was about the same. So again, you can see that over the course of a year, they were reading a lot. Because again, the assignments were about 1 or 2 books for the one assignment per week, and like for the listening was about the same. So they were constantly reading large amounts, which of course is what we try to encourage our students to do for extensive reading and listening. So for my data collection and analysis, so what I did is I asked students, again, every week, I was using a Google form. So how did you achieve your goal? What did you do exactly? And I was encouraging them to use English or Japanese. And then of course, in the final class, I asked them to give advice to their, juniors. So, what would you say to your co-high or your juniors about achieving these goals? Now, in a previous study, I was using more of a hybrid inductive deductive thematic analysis, which is I was kind of looking for patterns. I was looking for like themes from emerging from the data. But for this study, I used deductive thematic analysis. So I was using an existing framework that was kind of the lens through which I was looking at the data for my analysis. So again, this was all qualitative. This was, based on the textual responses from both the Google Forms and the open-ended question. And when I present the findings later on, of course, just to let everyone know, the GF, of course, it stands for the Google Form. That's the weekly Google Form questions. And of course, the advice would be that final, final question for their juniors. And so for the framework that I used, I followed Griffith's 2018 framework of language strategies. And of course, she categorized them as cognitive or direct strategies. And of course, you can see here, those are the activities that a learner chooses to engage directly with the material to be learned in order to develop knowledge or understanding. It's things like keeping a language notebook, working out English grammar rules, memorizing new language. And we have metacognitive or regulatory language learning strategies. And those are the strategies concerned with managing, supervising, or controlling the learning process. And of course, they operate at an indirect level above direct cognitive strategies. And of course, here we have effective. For example, you're maintaining, keeping your motivation levels high. supervisory, planning, setting goals, selecting resources, and of course, social, right? So asking for help, whether that's to a peer, a classmate, or a teacher, for example. So looking through this framework, looking through this lens at the data, the first thing, of course, that came up was a very, again, this kind of mirrors my results from a previous study where there was a weak presence of cognitive direct strategies. So a couple of the students did mention the book was complicated with many characters, so I took notes where I tried to read a little each day until the deadline. I took notes to remember. And of course, I think all of us, have had students probably come up to us where they chose a book and the book would have a very complex storyline. So again, it might be at their comfortable level, but there are many characters, maybe there are many locations, and there's like many plot twists. So even if it's at your comfortable level, I think we can agree, even as a native speaker, if we're reading a book like that, it could be somewhat challenging to kind of keep in mind all of the different things happening, especially if you have to take a quiz at the end. So for these students, what they would do is they would keep notes. And of course, for student C, what they did is that because they broke down and they kind of planned their assignments over the week, in order to remember that content, they would take notes. That way, of course, they could finish the story and still, for example, they could start like on Tuesday and then finish on Sunday and still be able to understand enough of the content so that they could do the quiz at the end. But I think what we really do see is a strong presence of metacognitive and regulatory strategies. And we do have, of course, the supervisory or planning. Again, we have a few students here with comments such as student C, since concentration does not last for long periods of time, I planned in advance and then read a little each day. I read several books of 1,000 words or more than 3,000 words during my free periods and days off. That's from student D. It is important to decide when you do these assignments, it will prevent you from forgetting to complete assignments. And finally, I can focus on doing my task at night, so I read the books before going to bed. So again, I am using Griffith's research and her framework with strategies, but we also do have a metacognitive awareness. So for example, student E is aware that they, focus better at night rather than in the morning or in the afternoon. So they would plan ahead and make sure that they would do the assignments before going to bed. Same with student F, right? Again, deciding when to these assignments was very important. So not so much as random planning, but like, okay, when do I have time to do these? And student D, of course, was achieving their goals by selecting books at different word counts that would still tally up to the goal for that week. And then next we have selecting. So again, choosing resources. So here, interestingly, we do have some examples of choosing resources. We also have selecting environments, which I'll mention in a moment. But we have, for example, student B, like they chose one that I could usually finish listening to in less than an hour. Student D talks about in their advice, if it is too hard to read one book with a lot of words, divide the reading or listening into several books. Student E, I read a book that I knew what the story was about. Student, of course, mentions the story consists of short stories, so it was an easy read. And then finally here, of course, we have student C. I worked on my reading assignment at home, in libraries, and other places where I could concentrate. And so this was, of course, a theme that kind of came up in the students' Google Forms and advice. So in my extensive reading and listening course, I let students choose which assignment they could do. And so for a lot of the students, they felt the reading while listening assignment was easier to do in the classroom. And so a class would be 90 minutes. And so after you're doing like the Google form about your achieving goals, you're doing your book recommendation, you have like 60 to 70 minutes. And of course, if you have to choose your books, that could be part of that time as well. But some of the students, of course, were planning in advance and they were selecting books that they could finish. So they were like, okay, I have like an hour or 50 minutes, and this book I could probably, I could finish in that time. And of course, students see at the end here, they're very much aware, okay, maybe not so much in the classroom, but in the library or at home, I can focus more. And that's, where I'm going to read. So they not so much selecting the resources, but they're selecting the environment that could help them achieve their goals. So getting into setting goals, of course, and a lot of students talked about their listening assignments. And so as you can see here, student A talks about finishing their listening assignment in class because you can concentrate. So again, it's you get that blend of that setting goal, but of course you can also look at it as selecting the environment or planning. Um, for student B here, in order to not forget the content, I made sure to finish reading in one sitting. So while we did have some students taking notes to remember the story, there were some students that, like, once they started reading, they made sure they finished it. They set their own goal. Like, once I start, I'm going to finish. That way, I don't have to worry about remembering or taking notes. Um, and of course, we have here student D. I listened to one book of about 2,800 words and one with about 2,700 words. And you can see here that, again, they're setting the goals and they're dividing it up so that they can achieve the goal, right? So instead of like doing one long book that might take a lot more effort to remember the story and the content, they're choosing shorter books. And then, of course, they're making sure that one of these is going to be done in class. And again, student F, very much like like student B, is that, reading books all at once, again, so that you can remember the content. And getting into selecting here, of course. So we did talk about supervisory, and that's like selecting appropriate resources and what planning. But we also have affective selecting, as you can see here by these 4 comments. So, for example, student C talks about choosing a book that interests them, right? So again, you can concentrate on reading to the end. Student E talks about choosing a book about Christmas, because again, it was towards the end of that semester, and for them, like, choosing something for Christmas made it more enjoyable to read. Again, student E talks about choosing books with interesting stories, and reading the summaries will help you choose those books. And of course, it can motivate you. And finally, of course, student F, they chose a book that they were interested in so that they could read it easily. So again, finding books that were very much connected to their interest was very, very important for these students in achieving their goals. So based on, of course, like, we only have 6 students, of course, for this current for this study. Um, and so what, overall, what can we say? What kind of advice can we give, or potential advice can we give our future students? And I think these pieces of advice are very powerful in the sense that they are coming from the students, which I think, compared to what we can do as teachers, will go some way to helping students. But I think, hearing it from their peers, I think will have a lot more power. And so the strategies that, overall that we can see from these 6 students is that using the class time effectively. So, if you do have the class time, make sure that you're finishing one of these assignments in the class. Choosing books that are interesting, that suit your interests, very, very important. And any books that are really long, break them down into manageable chunks. Trying to finish a book in one sitting when possible. And again, trying to create a consistent schedule, right? So again, if bedtime is good for you, then that would be a way to achieve your goal. If you're more of a morning reader, then of course try that. Finding an optimal environment, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in the library, and of course, finally taking notes if needed. So those, of course, are some strategies that, I do encourage my students. And of course, when I start each new extensive reading and listening class, I will present this in Japanese, the advice and the feedback from their peers, so that they can hopefully then, take some of these suggestions into consideration for achieving goals. So finally, for the limitations and future directions. So um, again, there was an issue with the regular submission. Some students were, not, like, for example, they might be absent 1 week, so they may not have been able to submit that Google form. Um, and of course, what I'm doing right now with my current research is I'm, trying to look at those Google forms and trying to keep them as regular as possible. And again, questions targeting the various strategies. So right now it's very much an open-ended question. but the questions that I'm starting to use more and more is trying to focus on those different aspects of the strategies. And of course, follow-up interviews, because some students, unfortunately, will give you a lot of information, some not so much. So again, following up and seeing exactly why they said what they said could also shed some light on this topic. And I would like to also give some opportunities for sharing what they do. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, starting from this year, the extensive reading and listening right now, because we had to change our curriculum, I'm the only person teaching extensive reading and listening right now. It is, and now it has become an elective course. And unfortunately, like the number of students has decreased as a result of that. But what I'm hoping is, because the number of students did decrease, that maybe from now on, in addition to like how are you achieving your goals and what books do you recommend, if I can get some students to even like have give them some time to talk about like what they're actually doing and share share the strategies for achieving goals, that could actually help everyone within the class. So those are some directions that I'm thinking of for future research. So yeah, so thank you very much, everyone, and I hope that was helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask now.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, and I'm very glad that we're recording it, because I do want to go back and have a look at some of the things that you said. I just as my first question, if I may, anecdotally only, of course, have you seen English gains because of the extensive reading that your students have been doing?
That's actually a really good question. And again, it would be anecdotal, because again, I have not, considered that venue for research, although I think that would be a really interesting venue for research. But there was one student. Now, she was in my 2024 class, so not this data set. But she did mention like how she felt like she got a better score on her TOEIC because of taking this class. Again, it's anecdotal, so again, we can't say for certain, but for some students, like it did feel like it helped them, read longer passages and understand longer passages.
And has their reaction been positive? Have the students generally been positive about their experiences with the reading and listening?
That's actually a really, really good question. Because some of these students, like in the beginning, and actually, sorry, that's a really good question that I probably need to incorporate more into my end of year evaluations. Because I always ask my students, like, what advice would you give the students? And like a lot of the students are saying, like, it's really, it was not easy doing these, achieving their goals. But again, they're always like, optimistic and positive, and like, keep, just make sure you plan ahead, and like you can do it. So there's a lot of encouraging words. But the thing is, interestingly, and I probably have to be a little bit pessimistic here, but when we had the required course for the teaching license, we had about 30 to 35 students. As this year is the first year where we got an elective, right? So I'm teaching it solely. And we went from like about, and actually last year fall, we had about 11 in my class. My colleague had about 16 or so. But yeah, this year we had 7 sign up for my class. So, but the thing is though, I think, and this is something I'm thinking of doing this year for the current first year students, is I think they need to understand what extensive reading and listening is. Because as I said earlier, right, like many students think it's difficult English. Some students think it's technical English. So, which is interesting because when students find out that it's not technical English, some of them actually dropped my course because they were like, oh, it's not technical English. But then I have an introduction to learner autonomy where we are reading academic articles, now very specific, of course, but students stay away from that class. So I think what they're looking for is perhaps maybe like a general academic reading kind of course, which of course extensive reading and listening is not really going to help you with that, indirectly perhaps, but if you're looking for a general academic reading course, many extensive reading and listening classes will probably not help you in that regard. But kind of going back to the beginning of the year when I asked students for like their histories, what I do find is that there are students that they are confident in their reading and others are not so confident. But then of course some students, you can see that they're not even reading so much in their L1. So if they're not reading so much in their L1, then reading in an L2 for some students is going to be even more of a burden. Um, but again, it is a very interesting question to look into in the future to see, like, after this experience, did you have a better look, a better view of reading and listening? Yeah, very good, very interesting question. And unfortunately, I can't really give you a definitive answer.
Well, I think most of us probably don't have a definitive answer for that because it varies so much from person to person. But
It
it's
does, it
certainly
does.
very interesting, though, your experience with if people, quite often when students think that something is not difficult, then they think it's not worthwhile doing. And I think that's an attitude I come across a lot.
Mm,
Maybe it's more so in Japan, I'm not sure, but it feels like they want to have that difficult challenge rather than
mm.
something that they see as something easy, even though the easy reading is going to help them long term. So it's interesting to hear you saying that as well.
And kind of the comment on that, like again, it would be interesting to hear I would love to hear everyone else's feelings about this, but it could it could derive from the fact that a lot of junior high and high school reading courses are intensive reading based. Now, of course, it sounds like for you at your conversation school, you do have extensive reading. I know, of course, Pat, where you were working before, of course, you were doing extensive reading as well. So there are some places where kids are experiencing extensive reading and pleasure reading at an early age. But I also, I guess, how can I say, like what you guys are doing is might still be like once they get into the classroom and like they have the reading textbook, I'm wondering if they're like not able to transfer what they're doing in your class into like the high school classroom or the junior high school classroom, right? Where like, they go to for example, they go to your school, they do the extensive reading, but once you're in the high school or the junior high school, it kind of like is kind of blocked and like they just focus on like the intensive reading. And so
I think
once it get,
Yeah,
oh,
no, I
sorry, yeah.
was going to say my experience, like learning languages, was in many moons ago, before extensive reading was just a mere thought in somebody's mind. There was no extensive reading. We did intensive reading. It was French and German intensive reading. That's how you learned. So I can certainly understand how people have that mindset, but
Mhm.
I guess it's our job to try and convince them or show them that there is a benefit to uh, fluency gains, at least,
Yeah.
from reading stories, fiction, not just non-fiction that's a very high level. So,
Mm.
yeah.
I want to ask on the same topic here.
Mm.
Andre, you were saying that you have a 2 week orientation at the beginning of the course, yeah?
Yep.
And so after the students come out of that, what's your impression of their understanding of the benefits of extensive reading and their attitude towards it? Like, do they come around to it and say like, oh yeah, this is something that's very beneficial for me? Or do they feel like, oh, this is something fun to do for my elective slot? Or is it a different situation?
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I think one of the things I need to mention though is that up until this year, extensive reading and listening was a required course for the teaching license. So I think a lot of students were, again, probably taken because they felt like they had to. Anecdotally, of course, like that student mentioned about the TOEIC gains. Um, for some of the students, like they kind of realized at the end, like, this was helping me, but I think that is something that I probably need to work more on, to be honest, to kind of like encourage students to really understand like, what they can gain from it. I do talk about it, but I don't focus a lot on a regular basis. And I think, even with the 2-week orientation, you can probably say that, even with that orientation, it's still probably not going to be enough for students to really realize what the gains are. And that's where I think, like, for example, Paul's X reading could help, because there is that speed reading function that you can use. So like, you could actually have students do the speed reading at the beginning of the semester, and then at the end of the year have them like do it again. And that way they it's not so much a perceived benefit, but if they can see like, oh, wow, I can read much faster and still understand the story, I got those like, concrete gains. So I think for some students, there is a perception that it's helping them, but I think for some students it might be actually better for them to see something concrete. Now, again, they do have the number of books they read, they have the number of words read, but that's something that I have not really focused on. But again, something definitely to look into.
That's very good. Yeah, Ed, did you have any follow-up to that?
Yes, I did. Sorry if I'm coming in a bit laggy. I think my connection is not perfect right here. I wanted to ask about the word counts per week. Andre, did you say that it's 7,000 per week?
It's 7,000 words for no, oh, sorry. Um, I should mention, okay, so there for the reading assignment, it's 7,000 words, and that's to get the maximum number of points. So it goes 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,000. So if you're reading
Mhm.
2,000, you're going to get a point for that weekly goal. For the reading while listening, it's 5,000 words, and again, it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So so again, the goal is to get them to read and listen to about 12,000 words per week, which again, I think does go beyond what is encouraged for. I think it might be actually 9,000 words, if I remember correctly, is the recommended amount. But I kind of wanted to push them a little bit, and also too, a lot of extensive reading and listening extensive reading and listening courses often are more integrative. So there's like speaking or writing tasks involved. So there's not a lot of time for the reading or listening to be done, or it's in a homework assignment, where I think 12,000 words might be too much to ask for a homework assignment. But because I'm giving them all that time in class, I feel like, it's more feasible to ask them to read a lot more.
Right. What's the average number of words that you see coming in through every week?
Actually, if I can go back, so for the successful, let me see if you guys can you see my screen here?
Yep.
Okay, I'm just gonna go
Yes,
back.
yes, we can see.
So yeah, so you can see here, like, again, for the averages, I would have to calculate and get back to you, but you can see here, like, for example, student A over the semester, this is one semester, right? So we're looking at about 156,000 words. So, again, over like
How many
50,
weeks is the semester?
sorry,
Oh, 15. 15
uh,
weeks, yeah?
sorry, I didn't catch you.
Did you say 15 weeks?
It's about 15 weeks, yes.
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay, so yeah, so again, I would have to like look at the data more carefully to see exactly what they're reading on a regular basis, because some of the students, especially among these 6 students here, some of them were reading like to kind of meet the goals, but then there were some that were like always reading more than they had to. But I felt like they, even from the beginning, when I asked them about their reading, they tended to show more higher levels of motivation. And I think that's a key thing too. Like, students who enjoy reading, students who are interested in English tend to, you know, try to do more with extensive reading and listening from my experience.
Were there any paper books used, or was it completely digital?
Completely digital. Again, for the reading and the thing is, um, I do have a large number of graded readers in my office. Um, Many years ago, we received funding for a language center, and so we had budget for resources, and we bought a lot of graded readers. So we have English, we have French and German. But like But so unfortunately, a lot of the books were not really being used. So that's kind of the catalyst for trying to like, form and start an extensive reading listening course. But a lot of these books, of course, have CDs. So my students, like they really can't access the audio. And what's nice, like, I think one of the advantages of X reading, I can say, is that you can use it anywhere. If you have a cell phone, if you have a tablet, you access it anywhere. However, now that I have 7 students, because again, like this semester I have 7 students signed up. It's a smaller class, which we can debate whether that's good or bad. But for me, like it means that I can focus more on the students. And there isn't a possibility that I might consider having them use some of the paper books. Because with X reading for the reading while listening is great because I can keep track of what they're listening. But if I can get them to do some of the paperbacks, to kind of, at least give their eyes a rest from the screens, that could be something to look into. And with 7 students, it might be easier to set up like a boring system where they would come into my office, which is something that I used to do many years ago. Not as easy, not it wasn't easy to do because I had many students, but I did have like lunchtime boring times, and I would have my students come to my office. Like you're level 5, you come on Monday, you're level 6, come on Tuesday. And so they would board the books for their assignments. So I used to do that. So yeah, so it is definitely worth considering for this year. And again, we just started, so um, with the current with this class for this research, I had 2 weeks of orientation, but the Extended Reading Foundation placement test was used as a way to place the students before the classes began. So that was kind of a step in advance. But now it's just myself. The first week was like, what is extensive reading? What is your reading and listening history? The second week was actually the placement test. And then this week, it's going to be X reading, like how to use it, how to choose books and things like that. So yeah, so moving forward, definitely I could consider, having my students come into the office and choose books in addition to X reading.
Or, I mean, if you could, if you've only got 7 students, which I think that's quite a good amount to be able to have more personal contact with the students. You could always just take a pile of books and give them that option during that time that you said you had 60, 70 minutes where they were doing some sort of reading, just to give them a chance to see what a book looks like. And maybe encourage a little bit of variety. So yeah.
No, for sure, for sure. And
Mm,
and while I do have because also too, like X reading, like your Oxford University Press, they're not available, right? And I have a large
exactly.
number of those in my office. So
Yeah,
yeah, again, giving them that variety, giving that choice, again, which connects back to my other researching, which is, taking control of your learning, where these, we're getting, like when I meet students during class and I kind of talk to them about their reading and their listening, it does kind of bring in implements of like language and advising, where I'm trying to give them advice and support and trying to get them to think about, okay, what can I do to encourage, or sorry, to make sure that I achieve my goals. Now, interestingly, and of course, one of the students is not in this current study, but in a future study that this is probably the one I'm going to be presenting at in September. The student really took to heart like my advice about scheduling. And so like, so so that student was making sure that they had in their cell phone like the schedule for their reading and listening, and they kind of followed that, which was quite nice to see. Um, because again, part of it is like, if you can find time, if you can set up the schedule, it's not that hard. And it's just like just making sure that you do, follow a routine. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do is, in addition to making it enjoyable, we're also trying to instill that habit. And of course, that does not always work, but if you can get some people to kind of like, continue afterwards, I think that's a job well done for all of us.
absolutely. I totally agree. Having that scheduling, that's what I do for myself. I schedule time to actually read.
Mm,
And when I can tell students that, then they kind of like, oh, yeah, I suppose I could do that. Whether or
yeah.
not they do is another matter, but it's definitely good. Uh,
Mm.
do we have any other questions?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
Noriko.
yes,
Hi, I'm Noriko. Thank you for your
Nicole.
presentation.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to ask about interesting books. As your students said, read interesting books.
Mhm.
And I totally agree to that. But with my students, they always ask, what's interesting? So I was wondering how your successful students found their interesting book. You mentioned that students don't read Japanese books, or your successful students read Japanese books too?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's a really good question. I would actually have to look into their original Google form answers to get back to you on that. It just from my experience when I do the Google forms, there are some people that that say they don't read so much. And I think in today's society, more and more of us are probably not reading as much as we should be. Unfortunately, but that's kind of the world we're in right now. But I think getting back to choosing interesting books, like what I found from students is that, choosing books that they've read at least once in Japanese, choosing books that are related to maybe like a hobby, um, or like a movie that they've seen or a story that they've, or a drama. Now, oh, I'm going to butch the name of this. Is it maybe you guys can correct me here. Is it I Can You Can Press? Is that the
I talk,
publisher?
you talk.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think that's right. Okay, close.
Very
Those
close.
close, but not close enough, huh? But those books actually were chosen often by my students. There were some
Okay.
books, for example, about like I think it was like salarymen stories. Some books that were like about like the konkatsu, the wedding. So again, these were very much culturally connected to their lives. So I think that's the key thing is like encouraging students to find books that are connected to their interests, to their future goals. So some students were interested in going abroad, so they were reading books about, homestays in Canada or homestays in
Mm,
Australia. Like it's so again, encouraging students to look at the and with X reading, what's kind of again another advantage, I guess, of X reading. I'm not selling X reading at all, but like you can click the heart mark. So some students were going into the library, they were finding these books, whether from other students' ratings or whether it's connected to their interest or the summary, but they were putting them into their favorites. And
Mhm.
so, they would kind of go through those and they would, pick their books from there. But now, one thing that I am considering this year is giving them more like freedom in terms of levels. One of the things that I did find is that some students, because the reading set was like, say you're level 8, and so you'll be reading level 8 or level 7, maybe level 9. So you have that range. If you're doing the reading while listening, I kind of go with like, with Rob Waring's suggestion of like, -2. So if you're level 8, you're looking at like 6 or level 7. But over a year, the books start to kind of dry up. And so, then of course, like, where do I go from there? And that's where, of course, I try to get students to share what they're reading and listening to, hoping that maybe a friend will recommend something to them. But again, going back to what I'm considering this year is that if I can, maybe instead of saying like plus or -1, maybe I can say like, I'll let you choose any book below your level. And that could open up a variety. Of course, there are some books that I wouldn't recommend just because like they're too short or like, there's just too few words. But but again, if I can give them more choice and more variety, and they can find more books related to their interests and goals, and I think that can help them with their reading and listening.
Thank you very much. So
You're
they kind of start off with something that's relevant to them and then spread out, getting advice from their peers and teachers, I guess.
I think that's one way that they find books. And again, like I said, like sometimes they do read the summaries and they do read like the reviews and the ratings, and they'll choose from there. But yeah,
Hmm.
usually it's like, what am I interested in? And that's where they usually go to first.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sandra, I'm seeing lots of I see
Yes,
six.
I was just going to say, Chris, you've been adding quite a few comments, which we are not ignoring. But if you'd like to turn on your mic, perhaps you'd like to make a comment or ask a question.
Yeah, no, I really like this thing of getting your students to give advice to future cohorts who would be doing the same course, because I did that with my teacher training courses, but it was in the form of a letter. I said, at the end of the course, I said, could you write a letter to your future cohorts, saying, this is quite a lot of work. You've got to take on board that you're going to need this amount of time. It was kind of giving them a warning about what was involved in enrolling in this course. But also I liked your students' advice about how to do it successfully. I thought that was very nice. But
Thank
but I
you.
thought I would prefer a letter, a more personal letter. In my
Mhm.
case, it could have been in English because they were proficiency level students. But in your case, they'd have to be in Japanese, I imagine.
Well, interestingly, like I gave them the choice, English or Japanese, and there were some students that did write in English. And of course, when I presented the advice to the upcoming cohort, I would just use like the advice as they wrote. Now again,
Hmm.
like so I was using the Google Slides just because it was easier to share, and you could share multiple pieces of advice in one link. So that's why
Right. Yeah.
I think having the letters could also be very interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Jackie.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. You have a reading assignment and a reading while listening assignment. I was
Mhm.
wondering, because I've had some kids of my own who give feedback that like, wow, the reading while listening, like a really like I learned more that way, and I got more out of the story from getting it, I know, both ways and concentrated more. And
Mm.
so I was curious if you maybe you don't know, but did you have kids who listened when doing their just reading assignment as well?
Ah, okay. Actually, uh, yeah, thank you, Jack. Actually, for the reading assignment, I actually explicitly chose books that didn't have audio. Yeah, so yeah, because
Okay.
yeah, because I found like because again, like this is something that I really hope X reading Pat just raised his hand. We're like in a classroom. Um, but yeah, Pat, you can wait. uh, but like one of the things like and I think we've all experienced this, is that like a lot of the books, especially on X reading, like not all the books have the audio. And so, like, and what I would try to do is like I would try to put all of the books with audio into the reading while listening assignment, and the ones that only had the reading would go in that other assignment. Um, so yeah, so again, it was kind of to allow them to like make sure that the books that they were listening actually did have the audio. But I think too, like, moving forward again, like we kind of started with this year, and I'm probably still following the way I did it like in previous years. But now that it's become an elective course, I do feel like there's more opportunities to try different things. So I think like, because I think we can also agree that with a lot of the audio files for some of these books, some of them are really good. Like Black Cat Publishers, which unfortunately I think Extreme doesn't have, I found be very, very interesting. but then you get like Oxford or Macmillan, where it's a little bit on the dry side. So I think it really depends on what you're using. Now, Jackie, what these the listening that you've been doing, like, is there a publisher in particular that you've been using with success? Anything that you recommend?
No, the class that I've been doing that in, we're not using X reading. So I went online and found some websites that have audiobooks where you can listen and read at the same time, and there are a few apps. And I told the kids, like, if you find a new app that I don't have on my list, please tell me. Like, so I'm like hoarding suggestions, um, but so they have kind of gone out to wherever to find different books where they could listen and read at the same time. So nothing specific, but yeah, I was also looking for free stuff, right? Because they buy textbooks, so this is like homework out of class kind of assignment, and so
Right.
yeah, that was another key criteria. 0N. So anyway, yeah.
I think though that's really important. It's like, where, because just recently, like, because I also teach a TOEIC class, and I was asking students in my TOEIC class, like, like, do you belong to any social networks? And like they're like, yeah, like, and they raise their hands. I'm like, do you use your social networks for language learning? And they're like, no, not really. I'm like, and I'm like there's so many opportunities, right? Like there's so many groups on Facebook for IELTS or on Instagram, like, so it's like kind of in the same similar vein, Jack, is like getting students to be aware that you don't have to pay. Now, of course, we're not saying like break the law, but there's a lot of free resources out there if you just look. And I think raising our students' awareness of those opportunities is really important. So I think that's really cool that you're getting your students to find these free materials, and then getting them to kind of relay them back to you so that you can kind of build a database to share with others. So because I think that will go a long way. And again, getting students to share those things with other students can even go further.
Yes, well, that's the dream. We're getting, we've just launched it, so all things crossed at this point. But yeah. So far, so good.
Right.
So, yeah. Cheers, André.
Thank you.
I think we're on to Pat now. We've had his hand up, and
Pat, yes.
it's gone now.
Hey there,
Pat's gone.
Andre.
Oh, hey, Pat.
I just wanted to throw out there that I'm pretty sure in a X reading assignment, you can turn off the audio. So if you want to split up books by reading and listening or reading only, you don't have to sort based on whether or not there's audio originally attached.
Right. Well, the thing is, like, what I was doing, Pat, was that there are a lot of books that don't have the audio file.
So
and
those will never be audio available, but you can always, if there is audio and you want to have it as a no audio book, that's available.
Right. Well, from my experience, and like I've actually had to help students with this, but what's happened is that some students were, they didn't really look at the fine print, so they chose a book like for their reading while listening assignment that had no audio. So like what I kind of did to help them is like I kind of made sure like all the books without the audio files were like in this one assignment, and the ones that had audio files available were in the other assignment to avoid confusion.
So I'm just throwing out there that if you want to add some to the no audio that actually do have audio, that's a possibility for you.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Yeah.
I had a quick question about students taking notes as they read, like you mentioned that some were. Just out of curiosity, where were they taking notes? Were they making notes like on a piece of paper, or are they actually
on a notebook,
phone?
piece of paper? Yep, like it's. I didn't really ask exactly where they were taking notes, but like I could see people like with like writing down things during class. Obviously, it'd be kind of a nice function if they had that in X reading to take notes. But yeah, I think letting students were just keeping it like on a paper or on the computer, just that they could remember. Because even some like as I mentioned earlier, even some of the books that could be like level 6 or level 7, like even the lower level books could have multiple characters. And so like trying to keep track of who's doing what and where and why. It's like even though the quiz at the end of the book is supposed to be really simple, if you're trying to like understand all these different characters and keep track of them, like, and again too, it kind of goes back to the students, like if you're reading that book in one sitting, you might not have a problem. But if you're reading it Tuesday and then like maybe the next day is Thursday and then like Saturday, you kind of need a way to make sure that you're not forgetting what's going on. Now, interesting, one student, I think this was actually in the upcoming study I'm doing. I think this one student was talking about how they would actually, if they would start reading, and then they, when they had to read it like later at a later date, they would actually go back and kind of skim through the part that they read before, just to kind of get themselves up to speed with the story, which I thought was a kind of an interesting strategy.
That's something where paper can be quite useful, paper books.
Yeah.
I encourage people, like if they, because at my school, obviously we don't use digital, it's all paper books. If they have a bookmark that they can put a sticky note on, and then they can make notes as they go. You can, if you're a bit confused about the characters, which quite frankly, some graded readers, even I'm a little bit confused about the character list, you can make a note and put that on a sticky note or something, and you can have it with you while you read, whereas in digital form it's not quite that simple to keep that with you.
Yeah. No, for
I've
sure.
seen some of my students get carried away with the note taking. And so I've got X reading as well, right? And we have middle school students, and some of them are completely new to extensive reading. They kind of don't know what's going on. And so we've had similar issues with some of the students, especially in the higher levels, where they will read quite long books with a whole bunch of characters, and it's very difficult for them to keep up. And then the quizzes at the end, they claim, I haven't seen too many examples of this, but I assume it's true, is that some of the quiz questions will be more detailed than they expect. Because in theory, the quiz is only there to prove that you actually read the book. It shouldn't be a comprehension test in that way, but some of them will be a little bit more fine than perhaps they ought to be. But in any case, one day I was observing a student, not one of my students, a different student, with a little notebook out doing the X-ray. I'm like, oh, what's this? And I had a look, and they had like a full page of all these notes written down, all these details of what's going on, because they're just scared that it's going to come up in the quiz, and so this is their mitigation strategy. It's like, oh, I don't want to miss out on some of the details, and it comes up in the quiz and I fail, right? So that's something to be aware of. I told them, good idea for a long book, a few notes, but don't get into the habit. Probably not a good idea.
Well, I think that's the thing, Ed. Like when I talk to my students, like about reading longer books, right? I try to tell them like it's okay to keep notes if you're trying to keep track of like this person and like whatever, like, and maybe there might be like a word or two that you might need to know.
Yes.
But yeah, I try to tell them like if you're taking too many notes, then it gets into intensive reading, and you should be able to understand the story. But again, as you pointed out, and Sandra of course also mentioned, some of these books, they're meant to be graded readers, but you're still there's a little bit of memory.
Especially with character names, because often the students are not familiar with English names, unless it's like Michael or John or something like that. But that can get very, very confusing when they've got like 6, 7 different character names that they've never come across before. It can be very, very difficult to figure out who was speaking and who said what. So
Yeah,
and it's easy to just space out when you're reading anyway, and you just kind of forget who's saying what. It's like someone said that, I don't know who.
And I think that's again like with X reading, it's meant to be more like as you're saying, like just a check, right? So it shouldn't be that complicated, but again, it can get challenging. Like I know one book that I used to use, or students, I think not sorry, it wasn't read that much, but I think the Oxford University Press had a copy of Les Miserables. And of course, there are many characters in that book, many French names in that book. And so And I think another one's Arabian Nights, I think was another one that Oxford published. And again, it's still a
Yeah.
lot of names that are, are even unfamiliar to English speakers. And so like when students are, this is back in the day when I would, when students would come to my office and they would be looking at the books and I'd be like, yeah, this might be interesting, but just please keep in mind that, it might be a little bit challenging because of the names, but don't worry so much about the names. I think that's the key, that's kind of the important thing is to kind of make sure that students are aware that, they don't have to remember every little detail, right? It's just, as long as they can enjoy the story and get to the end, that's the main thing. But it can be challenging. It can be challenging, especially students that are, that are so used to reading for tests, where like they feel like they have to like keep notes. So kind of weaning them off
Yeah.
that style of reading is kind of difficult at times.
I was thinking about the characters. Like some graded readers have, like at the very, very beginning, they have a page and maybe have a couple of pictures with the names of the characters. I actually find that more stressful than like reading it and them coming up naturally in the story, because I feel like on the very, very first page, I'm being told you must remember this character, this character, this character, this character, their names, their connections with each other, and it's sort of, I find that quite off-putting to actually have that at the very beginning, maybe at the end or as an additional note. But it's, if you have to do that, then perhaps they should be rewriting the story a little bit to make it easier. So yeah.
Yeah. I think in theory it helps just to have the students recognize that these are names. And so they have all of that with the CH Foundations library. Every single one of those will have the characters at the bottom. And so when I sit down with the very weak, very young students, I sit down with them, I was like, okay, so this is a name, this is a name, this is a name. For that, it's useful, but I totally agree.
Now, are there any other questions, comments? Kimberly, who has not said one thing the entire time,
Well,
which
I
is
think
most unusual.
I think Chris had to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Pat.
That is,
Okay, sorry,
such a,
Kimberly.
Pat is such a zoomer.
I was just wondering, Andre, if there were any parts of your assignments that you have kind of tweaked or changed in response to some of the things that you've learned from students and their various strategies.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Pat. I think, like I said, because this is the first year where it's now an elective, I think things might change a little bit moving forward. I've kind of kept it like the word counts as they were, but one thing that I would often do is if, like, for example, they failed a test or failed a quiz, I would actually go in and delete that book and give them another chance later on to reread or re-listen to that. I didn't usually do that in the beginning, but in the last couple of years, I would make sure to do that. Because again, like, there could be various reasons why they weren't able to get the quiz, right? And again, the score is 60%. It's a really low threshold to achieve. So kind of just making sure that they get that second chance was something that I did implement. But like I said, now that it is an elective course, I might actually try to get students to, like I said, share more what they're doing. And again, going back, like it's been using X reading, and of course that kind of started because of COVID. Um, and so I kind of just kept using it because, like I said, I could keep track a little bit better. But going back and using paper books, even for just the reading assignment, for example, could be something to look into. So I think moving forward, there's, now that it's, like I said, like, now that we are an elective course, I think there are things that, I could look into doing.
Thanks, Andre. Just a follow-up on that. Do you
Okay.
adjust the amount of books that are available for choice over the course of the year?
The Actually, I would have to say no, because like if, for example, if you are placed at level 6, then you'll have access to like the level 1 plus or minus 1 above your reading level. So if you want it, like, so basically over time, as I'm consulting with my students, if for say someone says like, I would like to move up, then I would change them and then I would have access to more books. But again, one possibility is, for example, from this year, is to like give them, like, for example, instead of saying like plus or minus one, say like, plus one or like, minus six, or kind of give them more access to the lower levels. Could be something I could look at doing. But I haven't really, like I said, like the assignments are not going to start for another 2 weeks. So I think that could be something that I could implement.
I found that with some of my students, if I give them the full library at the beginning, say even the full library at one particular level,
Okay.
they get so overwhelmed with choice that their individual choices become kind of superficial because they spend so much time on perusing books and looking at books. So recently I've been kind of constraining the choice a little bit in the beginning.
Okay.
So that the choice task is not taking up their time so much.
Okay.
And then gradually kind of expanding it by several series each week. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's really helping or helping or not yet, but it's something I'm kind of playing around with right now.
I think that's actually very interesting you mentioned, because I had a discussion about this with other resources with students in my introduction to learning autonomy, where we were talking about like internet and the amount of resources and the disadvantages could be that there's just too much choice that you don't really know what to use. Yeah, so I think that definitely could be an option. Again, that's one of the reasons why I have the book recommendations, is that all students can access the book recommendations, and they can see like, maybe there could be something that they might want to read. Yeah, I think, but again, I also open the assignments like 30 minutes before the class, so students do have some time to kind of peruse the library before. But that's an interesting point, Pat. Like, it's something that I haven't really thought about, and something that perhaps I could even talk to my students about this year, because I do have fewer students, thereby giving me more time to focus on each one. So if, like, say, if I do see that students are having a little bit of difficulty finding, appropriate books, then perhaps I could like start limiting or even like giving suggestions myself.
Andre, do you do any like class reader kind of books with your extensive reading class? Like everybody reads the same and discuss, or even pairs or something like that?
That's something that I haven't considered yet. It's for me, like, I really like, again, I understand the value of that, because again, students can share and they can talk. I still kind of lean towards like letting students choose wherever they want to choose, kind of giving that autonomy. But again, like I said, with this first, this is a new iteration of my extensive reading listening course. So depending on like what students are doing, I could, try that. Now we did do the placement test last week, and there were, it was kind of like almost like half and half. There were some like level 7s and level 8s, and then they had like level 5, 4, and 3. So I could group them off and try that. But again, like, I kind of want them to have as much time as possible during class to do the reading. And again, so I also work, there's like a balance. Like, I don't want to incorporate too many activities that would take away from the act of reading and listening. But again, with 7 students, there are possibilities. So something to look into.
Yeah, I was thinking if it's 30 in the class, that's a bit more challenging. But if you can, and especially if you know their level, you've done this leveling thing. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. I found that some kids really enjoy talking about the same book with their classmates. I kind of do it as a way to help. This is not an elective class, helping kids like get to their level and actually like they've read something because they had to read it for a class discussion. So they're not at 0 at the end of the semester for them. So I don't know if my motivation is in the right place or not. Trying
Well,
to
the thing is,
not fail loads and loads of kids. So, yeah.
so again, if there's any way to encourage the reading, right? Like I think, that again, it could be it could be interesting to look at, like, to do 1 week, reading on your own, the next week choose something with a partner, right? And see like which they prefer. Because I know the ELT journal, I think, I don't know if anyone read this article. I think they did a study where they actually had like the findings showed that students preferred the class reader to I think it was the ELT journal. Is anyone familiar with this article? It was a few years ago. Pat, do you remember this article? Oh, Pat's.
I know Paul has had similar results with students in the past. I don't know
Okay.
about that particular ELT journal one.
Okay. Yeah, I think again I would have to dig it out, but in the last few years it came out, and yeah, I think it was like the class readers were considered like, it was a positive, um how can I say, like a positive experience with the class readers. So, but again too, like, you know I think it's, well, like I said, I kind of, there's that balance, but at the same time, like when it's like if like we saw each other on the street and like I saw like a program on Netflix and you saw something on like HBO Max, like we can't really talk about it, right? But if we both saw like the HBO Max show, like The White Lotus, we'd be like, oh, right, like it was like, so I definitely can see the benefit of sharing the reading there. So that could be something to look that I could try. Like, it's like I said, the semester just started. We have that 1 week of the orientation. I could even ask the students to kind of give them that choice. Like, would you like to kind of try individual reading 1 week and then paired reading the next week and see which they prefer? That could even be an interesting study, although it's a very small study, of course.
Well, you have lots of opportunity, I think, with this small group. I know that, you can try lots of different things out and talk to them and get, good feedback, from them as you go. So, yeah.
Hmm.
I hope you enjoy your semester. I
Thank you,
think your
thank you.
year with them. I hope it goes well. Yeah.
I hope so too.
Now, do we have any other questions for Andre or comments before we stop the recorded part of the proceedings?
Yeah, I've got one more.
Patrick?
But just along Jackie's line, probably about 2018, Greg Schultz ran a study with about maybe 20 different teachers with their own respective classes,
Mhm.
where students in 1 week would individually choose books, and in the following week would choose one book to read together. So it wasn't a class reader decided by the teacher, but it was something kind of jointly negotiated within the group.
Mhm.
So it's kind of somewhere along the line between complete choice and no choice. And I think a lot of students really enjoyed that chance to have input from other people on which book they're going to read, and maybe even a little bit of the accountability too.
Mhm.
Actually, Andre, just while I'm thinking about it, because I know you're teaching French as well at your school. Any thoughts about extensive reading in French?
Of course, Roman would be the person to ask. Because I always want to like pick his brain on the books. Because again, I think other languages are still, again, like I say, I'm not a specialist, but the feeling I have, especially by looking at the graded readers that I do have in French, you like, I wouldn't call them graded readers. Because even like the beginning level books that I have, you still need to know like the past tense, the present tense, the adjectives, like all the the different kinds of like masculine nouns, feminine, like there's so much vocabulary that's required and grammatical knowledge that it would end up just being intensive reading. So I think like, and again, in even picture books, and I think there was even a study done with English picture books. I think that McLean did a study, if I'm not mistaken, where like the vocabulary in picture books, which are meant for children, are still very much advanced for a language learner. So like for extensive reading in French, like again, I think Roman does have probably some really good suggestions, but again, students do need to have that base knowledge. Now, something that I'm kind of looking into doing with my own French class is I've been preparing some dialogues, based on my own like I'm just writing them myself in French. I'm also using like AI tools to help, but I'm also kind of thinking like maybe I could create like mini summaries of the conversation. So kind of like it's not extensive reading in the purest sense because it would be really short text, but it could be like something they could read after the dialogue where it's like it wouldn't require so much vocabulary knowledge because they would have already done the dialogue and then they could just read like a summary of what the two people talked about. But yeah, like when it comes to commercial materials, I still feel like for the other, again, like I said, I don't know if with other languages, but from what I've seen with French, um, it's still, I would still put them very much in the intensive reading department.
So basically, the resources are not available yet that you would feel comfortable initiating a program because there's just not the material there.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like, but that said, like, I guess you could also look at the English graded readers too, like, because a lot of my students don't have French knowledge at all, right? They're coming in like, they might not even, I do get some students that have like a superficial knowledge, they might know the numbers or they might know the alphabet, but pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary is very much from the beginning. And when you think about it, like, some of the graded readers for English, if you brought them into someone who had no English experience, some of these, like even the beginning, like Oxford books would still be, I think, out of reach for a lot of students, right? So I think a lot of these graded readers that we're seeing, or that I've seen, sorry, is more like if students can get a year of, say, French under their belt, then maybe they're in a better position to start reading. But again, the vocabulary, like what I've seen is that the vocabulary is like still quite, I think, advanced for even like even after a year of French, unless of course you are teaching more of an intensive type of course. In my case, I wouldn't really call it an intensive French. It's more, required elective. Students have to choose a language for the year in addition to English. So you also get the motivation as well. Like, yes, they can choose, but it's always a question like, why do they choose this language? Which is something I always try to get my students to talk about. But yeah, but right now it's like, if I brought in one of the graded readers I have, it would just turn into probably like a translation activity.
Yeah. Such a
Mm.
shame, but I mean, we're also very lucky in English having the resources available to us.
Yeah.
So.
But like I said, like I know that at PanSig, the forum, I think that's the topic. I don't know. Is anyone going to PanSig? I know Pat is.
Yep, Noriko, I think you're going, aren't you? Jackie? No. Ed, probably not.
I'll make it.
She really is. Wow.
So there we go.
Kimberly, are you in Japan now?
No, hang on. No,
Okay,
hang on.
okay.
Kimberly, you're thinking about the World Congress. We're talking about PanSig.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
I keep thinking that too. But I think, Ed, you are going to the World Congress. I seem to remember coming across your name on the list of people presenting. Is that correct?
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Yes, you did. Yes, I'm on there.
Very
Okay,
good.
nice.
But PanSig, yes, is going to be exactly, Andre, if you're going, so you'll be able to pick Roman's brain and also others. It's going to be Shinshu University and Kyoto Gaidai, talking about different languages, extensive reading in different languages. So, and how they do it, and it sounds like a very, very interesting forum. So, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't overlap with the materials writers SIG forum, but I need to double check that. The PanSig schedule this year, I don't know, it's quite, yeah, it's a little hard to follow. Yeah, the whole new system of Indigo is, it takes a little bit of getting used to, is what I felt. Yeah, but again, looking forward to it. Yeah, hopefully I can get some, advice from Roman, because again, I would like to incorporate some reading, even if it's like not so much intensive reading. If I can get a little more, again, like I said, I don't think I can get into extensive reading at my level of students, but if I can get them to at least read something that they can understand and not have to use a dictionary for every single word, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Now, is there any other questions, or shall we? I think we will say thank you very much. We're not ending, but we're ending the recording. So thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you.